It does seem like we are living in a moment in history now where people are extremely skeptical about politicians, the media, and people who disagree with them.
Yeah, I mean, from my vantage point, skepticism that people have towards the media and actually all of our institutions isn't really a new phenomenon. I mean, if you look at some of the research on this, people have been becoming more skeptical about their government and media institutions for well over 30 years now. It's been kind of this like downhill trend. I think there's a lot of things that have accelerated it maybe recently. Political rhetoric, one, right? Like, our own politicians sort of, calling into question their own institutions. But I do think that, our media environment has had something to do with it too. Up until the past, 15 years, right, we had like pretty solid gatekeepers in the media, right? We had people, for better or worse, right, who were making decisions about what gets into the news and what doesn't get into the news. And, social media, again, for better or worse, took that away. And it's harder to kind of tell what, a mainstream news source is, as much as people like to use that term, right? And what types of news we should be using. So I think that also has just contributed to this, greater climate of skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the influence of social media, as you pointed out, it has positive and negative implications. And one of the positive things is that people get to say what they think, and people who are on the margins or at least not in the mainstream get to share a point of view. And I think that there's something really important about being able to do that. But I think that brings with it a need for people to be able to assess information and evaluate evidence very carefully. And I don't think we all are equipped with those skills. And I think people are skeptical because you can hear, one point of view and someone else in a position of authority say, that's just false, that's fake news, like that didn't even really happen. And so from my point of view, I can really understand, I'm somewhat sympathetic to a skeptical outlook for like a regular person just trying to go into the world and understand what's really going on. So I can really appreciate how someone could look at all the information out there, and there's so much of it. So even if you really try to be very diligent about looking around and seeing what's going on in the world, you can. It's just hard. You couldn't even get through a day if you really read all the interesting, pertinent information out there. So you've got to kind of cut back on what you're going to listen to or read. And so I think a kind of skepticism is almost inevitable, but I would like to say that in some sense it's very healthy. And I think that questioning is very important. I think what's interesting is where we go from that questioning.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I just want to say I really like that you aren't so negative about social media, because I feel like when we talk about the culture that we live in right now, social media gets a lot of blame. And maybe some of it is placed, well there, but I think your point about being sympathetic to the fact that people need a place to express their voices, and this isn't all bad, I think about how, I've been reading a lot of things recently about how expertise doesn't mean what it used to mean, right? Whether it's expertise, like about gatekeepers and journalists, and like, oh, well, the editor knows what's best for us, or the doctor knows what's best for us, or the professor knows what's best for us. And what's kind of happened, for instance, is when, like, mothers, for instance, didn't feel like that they were being listened to by their doctors, right? They were able to go online and create their own forums and help each other out, right? And voice their own opinions and figure out problems on their own. And of course, there's there's two sides to that, right? There's people who might not necessarily be educated in things like vaccine science or whatever, having these conversations. But I think it's emblematic of a. I think that some of what we've seen is a response to a larger problem, in that there are groups that have maybe been condescending and not clear in their communication. And now that the public has the ability to go and find out information on their own, they're doing it. And I think there's something really still magnificent about it. In thinking just about the news, before social media, right, the New York Times was the one who reported that there were weapons, of mass destruction. Mm-hmm. And that was not true. I mean, and I think the New York Times is a credible piece of journalism, I think that the journalists there do an excellent job, but nothing's perfect, right? And this type of stuff was happening long before we had social media, and skepticism was important then, mm-hmm. and it's important now, right? But you also mentioned sort of this information overload. Just there's so much out there, and I guess the question is like, well, do we have to be skeptical of everything, or is there some safe space, right, mm-hmm. where we don't have to question things?
Yeah, so I guess I like your idea of bringing up the idea of expertise, and I think there are, there's a whole literature that's grown up in philosophy about epistemic injustice, and basically what an epistemic injustice, it's a variety of things, but one thing is that you just don't listen to someone, or you don't take them as a source of knowledge because you have some kind of bias against them. Mm-hmm. And so I think the mere fact of epistemic injustice does make us question, what is the true story here? If we're only getting information from a certain group of people and discriminating and not listening to and not giving credibility or expertise to people who actually have it, that's a serious problem. Yeah. But on the other hand, I think that I think we agree on this, there are experts, there are people who are educated, and we should be deferring to them. So I think a certain kind, again, of epistemic humility begs me when I'm trying to think about scientific policy, say public policies having to do with science, medicine, and technology. Given that I'm not in those fields, I think it's very important to me to listen to what leading scientists are saying and say, okay, well, these are the experts. I'm going to listen to them.
So where do we get that now? You have it, but maybe not everybody does anymore. Yeah, like how do we get back sort of that respect for other people's knowledge in realms that we don't have?
Yeah, so I think part of the problem is a sort of inference that people make that just because a credible source of information makes one mistake, even if it's a big mistake, that doesn't diminish them as being not credible at all or not an expert at all.
My students always, I'll ask them, well, why don't you like this source? And they'll say, well, because it's biased. And I'm like, what isn't biased? I mean, I was like, if it's created by a human, it's got some sort of bias on it. And I always say to them, I was like, I think your job as a consumer is to recognize what the bias is and then figure out what you're going to do with it. But that doesn't necessarily mean just, stamping it out or...
so it's just, you can't just dismiss outright someone who's got an interesting view or has studied information mm-hmm. and done their homework, so that they might not have the right answer, but there's certainly someone worth listening to and listening to very carefully. And I think, that's part of what's so valuable about a liberal arts education to me. So I think, in the Eberly College, that's what we do. Yeah. We teach people how to read, to write, to think, to assess evidence, to look for new evidence, to know where to look for new evidence, to ask the right questions. And I think all of those skills...
And to be exposed to fields where, even if they don't, want to go into that field themselves, right, they learn to appreciate an expertise in a different realm.
Right. And so I think... to just have some kind of radical skepticism where you say, okay, this person made a mistake, or I don't know exactly what to believe here, mm-hmm. to just dismiss all the evidence and just to say, well, so I'm just going to be a dogmatist and believe whatever I want to believe, or believe what my party says, or believe what my leader tells me is true. You have to keep your critical thinking skills and constantly be improving upon them. And where you lack skills, you need to be able to admit that to yourself and go to people and listen to people who have the expertise that you lack.
Anecdotally speaking, I think that we are living in a time where people are being very strongly guided by their emotions, and specifically, emotions that are tied to specific groups. I think, we have always had fake news, for instance. We've had it, on the racks of the tabloids, grocery store tabloids all the time. But the difference is right, people kind of understood what tabloids were. Like, they were in their own package. Right. People knew what to do with it. But now, the lines are blurred, and like real news looks kind of like fake news, and real news will sometimes have misinformation, and
right.
There's all these. It's more confusing, but I think what makes it worse is that a lot of the people who manufacture these types of information, whether they're doing it for profit or doing it for political reasons, that know that the most successful types of misinformation are the things that divide us and the things that make us angry. And I think all the things that you're talking about is exactly what we need. But, as I'm hearing you talk, I'm thinking, but it's so hard to get people to stop and think critically about things when things have made them mad, or they feel fear, or they feel like people are coming out to get them, or they feel like 50% of our country, are lunatics, who, want to come and get them or take things away from them. And I think a lot of people in our country feel that way right now. And I think that one of the reasons for that is, kind of ironically, like the reason they can't take information at face, or critically all the time, is because some of that information is actually designed to sort of disrupt them emotionally. And there actually is research on something called the hostile media bias, which basically says that partisans, and that doesn't have to mean like Democrat or Republican, a partisan could be somebody who feels strongly about any social issue. Partisans on both sides of an issue can read the exact same news article, and even if this news article has been determined to be as objective as possible by some neutral party, both people will see it as being biased against their side, right? Or not just like, oh, it's biased, but it's hostile against me. And that causes a lot of problems, because then it's like you just, what you were saying earlier, it's like they'll just dismiss it without giving it any sort of consideration.
Or also that, like, when you read something and you think, oh, this is what I already thought.
Yeah.
So you don't even really
confirmation bias. Yeah.
And then you share it.
Yeah.
And to me, like, an interesting question is, what does a share mean?
Yeah.
Like, are you saying, or should we believe that if I share something to you, that I'm thereby endorsing it as being accurate?
But I think
or
that's
is it just
what happens. I mean, that's something new, right? It's like, okay, so we talked about gatekeepers before. We had people deciding what news shows up on our front door every morning.
Right.
Now, the people sharing our news are the people in our social network, and
right.
we've already sort of assigned them with varying levels of credibility in our head.
Right.
And then some people, whether or not they deserve it or not, we think is being very credible. So no matter what they share is probably something that we, take to heart. Getting back to my point about the emotion, I'm just like, it's everything on these platforms happens in such a knee-jerk fashion, right? They're doing that because maybe the headline resonated with them. Another piece of advice I give my students, is just, I don't know if it works or not, but I still give it to them because I think it's a good rule of thumb. I say, if you read something and it makes you feel angry, that should be a trigger to stop and just ask yourself why it makes you feel angry, instead of pushing the trigger. Because like I said, I really believe that a lot of this stuff, and I don't think it's all political motivated. I don't think it's like a conspiracy all the time. Sometimes it is, but I don't think it's all the time a conspiracy. I think it's just people, the way that the economy works on social media is to get people to click on things and to get them to share things.
Right.
And the things that we're more likely to do that with are these knee-jerk reactions that hit us, in the gut. So if you feel like you got a sucker punch to the gut, like when you read something, I'm like, I guess that's the first, like, okay, slow down. Don't share it. Just think about it and think about why it was written. Read it. That's the other thing. It's like, also try to read it before you do it.
Yeah.
But that's still just the first step of how do I slow down and become more skeptical. That's it. How do I just slow down so I can dissect it more?
Yeah, or just be a critical thinker and, read it and think about it for yourself.
I think that's so hard for people. I mean, you're going through your newsfeed and you've got like, a gazillion things coming at you at once. You can't be critical about everything. So how do we...
Okay, but then you just admit that. You say, okay,
That's
this is in
yeah.
my news feed, period.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's false, but I
Yes.
just saw it. And just try to
I don't know.
bracket. Yeah, so to admit that this is something I can't really say is true or false, and
Yeah.
so I think it'll just rein it in. And
That humility is definitely
right, and
an ingredient that's missing.
You know, those are the skills that we teach in our college and in our departments for sure. And I just think, you know, to have a thriving democracy, we need a very highly educated populace, and we need to teach people basic skills that you really get in a College of Arts and Sciences.
I wish we got it earlier. I mean, I'm
yes.
Well,
Okay.
I'm a proponent. You know, I think it's. Of course, I'm biased because, you know, I'm a media person. But you know, most of my students don't get any classes on media literacy, and you know, before they get to college, and even here, it's optional, which I do. You know, the curriculum. You know, our high school curriculum. You know, it's a busy place. I get that, but you know, I do think it's funny that the things that we're concerned about our children consuming all the time. You know, you hear all these like sort of alarmist news reports about how much time kids spend online and everything. And I was like, okay, well, the answer, they're not going to stop doing it. We just need to teach them how to do it, right? Like, just the answer isn't for students not to use Wikipedia, for instance. Why don't we show them how to use it well, how to use it critically, how to maybe even control some of the content instead of just sort of like, you know, passively, you know, taking it in or whatever. And I don't see those types of things happening because I agree with you. I was like, that type of education would help us. And I don't even think it has to be at the college level. I think that's where people get it.